Let's go to MSNBC senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard in Seoul ahead of the APEC summit. Also with us, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Biden administration, Jared Bernstein. He's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. And there's MSNBC political analyst Ashley Parker of The Atlantic. Great to have you all here with me. So, Vaughn, let's start with Japan. That's what's all the focus today. What's President Trump's goal with this leg of the trip, and what concrete wins does he hope to leave with?
Right, Anna, just a few hours ago, he arrived here to Japan from Malaysia. He met with the emperor behind closed doors, but his big meeting is going to be a few hours from now when he meets with the new prime minister of Japan, somebody who he has called an acolyte, somebody who he says will be a close ally in leadership. She is the first woman prime minister of Japan. She was named PM just earlier this month, somebody who is very much of a conservative here, somebody who will fall in line and who the president views as being a good partner. President Trump here on this trip already opening up the potential of further trade negotiations. Folks will recall that earlier this summer, after the president placed more than 25% tariff on Japanese goods coming into the United States, he sat down with the trade minister of Japan and ultimately hammered out a framework of a deal that included $550 billion that Japan was going to give to fund American projects. There's a big question mark exactly whether that $550 billion will ultimately make it here into the U.S. and exactly what those funds will ultimately fund. But this is where this meeting is going to be not only critical for the American president, but also for the new Japanese prime minister, Anna.
And Vaughn, this is all really the precursor to what many see as the main event during this trip, and that's Thursday's meeting with China's Xi Jinping. The White House signals a trade deal is close. What are the details?
Right, and I'm actually told just a few moments ago by a White House official that the Trump-President Xi meeting is set to take place on Wednesday night in South Korea. In Busan is where this meeting is going to take place before the U.S. president flies back. And this is going to be a substantial meeting. Earlier this weekend, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, as well as the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, met with their Chinese counterparts to establish some of the talks of what would be a framework of a trade agreement with China, according to the U.S. administration. If you look at some of the points that Scott Bessent here is suggesting could be hammered out by President Trump. He, of course, there was a threat on the table of increasing tariffs on Chinese goods by 100%. Scott Bessent says that is off the table. There is also a delay on export controls on rare earth minerals up to a year. There is also the expectation that China would resume buying U.S. soybeans. Of course, as part of this trade stalemate, China had effectively turned to other sources, including Argentina. And then, of course, there are still a lot of agricultural details to hammer out. Of course, a China trade deal is long loomed over the Trump administration, dating back to 2020 when they put forward a phase one deal that ultimately China never upheld its end of the bargain on. I want to let you listen to Scott Bessent setting up the American president's meeting. Take a listen.
We had a very good meeting, Jamieson and myself, with our counterpart, the Vice Premier, and we have a framework for President Trump, President Xi to decide on, and we discussed a wide range of things from tariffs, trade, fentanyl, substantial purchase of U.S. agricultural products.
And rare earths.
And,
right?
rare earths.
But nothing has been agreed to yet.
Of course, that was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Air Force One on their way here to Japan ahead of these meetings. So this is a lot is here at stake here for this Asia trip. Of course, he started at Malaysia here over the weekend, is now in Japan before making his way here to South Korea, Anna.
And so, Jared, I wonder if this all holds, was it worth all the drama that has been happening up to this point?
Well, I guess that depends on who you ask. I think from the perspective of financial markets and American businesses, the answer would probably be no. I mean, this has become really a play we're seeing quite a bit lately, where Trump threatens embargo levels of tariffs on another country, in this case China, obviously one of our most important trading partners. Markets tank 300 points. A couple days later, he says, just kidding, and markets bounce back, which is happening as we're speaking this morning, Anna. So this kind of up and down has led to a great deal of uncertainty in U.S. markets. But at this point, I think many businesses are pretty used to it, and to some extent are just kind of try to ignore a lot of the noise and get about their business. Now, the list that Vought just took us through has some really important things on it. Obviously, rare earths, these are the minerals that go into so many of our products: computers, electronics, defense goods, battery production. China actually refines 90% of rare earth materials, so they're an essential trading partner in that regard. So when it comes to soybeans, our farmers export about half of their soybeans to China. That's fallen to close to zero. This is a real emergency for American soybean farmers. So that list is a potentially powerful one, but we'll have to see where this framework, how it evolves.
Yeah, and Ashley, in the recent weeks, we've gotten a crash course of sorts on the soybean trade. How big of a political win would the soybean purchases be?
It would be a huge win in the sense that one of the key reasons that voters told us they elected President Trump was economics and cost of living. And you are seeing in some states, red states, or among constituencies who voted for the president, including, for instance, Iowa farmers and others who produce these soybeans, that their lives have not changed, that while Trump has kept a number of his promises about, say, retribution and going after his political enemies, the things that they valued when they chose to reelect him, they're still hurting. And so these soybean exports would be a huge step towards making them feel better about that choice they made last November.
Jared, there's been so much analysis about whether the U.S. or China has the leverage in this trade war. Here was the Treasury Secretary's view on that.
The president had given me maximum leverage when he threatened 100% tariffs if the Chinese imposed their rare earth global export controls. So I think we have averted that. President Trump, to give me and the trade team leverage, decided that it would be a good idea for him to threaten 100% additional tariff, and it did give us a great deal of leverage. President Trump's very good at creating leverage for us.
Jared, is that how you see it? Did China cave?
No, it isn't how I see it in the China case. I see that in the Canada case, by the way. Let me just use that as an example of true leverage. Canada exports 75% of Canadian exports go to the U.S. Far less than that, about 20% of our exports go there. They export much more to us than we to them, and therefore we have a lot of leverage. That's not the case with China. So I would really discount what you just heard from Scott Bessent. And it's not important what you or I think. It's important what Premier Xi and his team thinks about this. And they clearly know that we depend on China and China depends on us. So again, as I said in my first comments, a lot of this is really noise between two sets of negotiators who both have quite high levels of leverage. Look, when we depend on rare earths for so much production and China refines 90% of their rare earths, they know they have that leverage over us. Now, I think at the end of the day, both partners want to keep trading, but there's going to be a lot of noise between here and there.
Ashley, President Trump's legal justification for most of the tariffs this year were a fentanyl emergency and a trade deficit emergency. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy argues it's not about any of that. It's just a power grab. Here he was on CNN.
These tariffs really are just a political tool that the president uses to help himself, sometimes to enrich himself. You've seen companies openly admit that they're making investments in his cryptocurrency in an attempt to win favor for him to try to get better treatment on the tariffs. You saw Apple make $1 million contribution to his inauguration and then magically get an exemption from the tariffs. They're just about giving Trump additional powers to try to benefit himself politically and financially.
Behind the scenes, are Republicans worried that they've opened the door for a Democratic president to come in and make unilateral trade decisions just like this?
Well, it's a little different in the sense that while President Trump is not particularly ideological, you can go back really to the 80s, and there's sort of two and a half key issues that he has long held, views he's long held, and that have animated him. One is being very tough on immigration, and the other is on trade. So there was an understanding that President Trump was going to come in and push tariffs and push this trade agenda. And he has used it. I mean, to answer your question more broadly, one thing the Trump administration is doing is they're getting very, very creative with legal justifications, with rules of the bureaucracy, with pushing the boundaries. Basically, as someone put it to me, they will push the boundaries until they run up against something, and they haven't really run up against much beyond the courts. They were surprised at how easily Congress rolled over. So yes, you do hear that a little, that another president might come in and be so emboldened, and that could certainly be a Democrat. But in general, President Trump, Republican or Democrat, is the first president to really just run roughshod over sort of the institutions and the norms of a functioning democracy.